So about 6 months ago, I made a couple of videos where I was getting a little bit heated. I was a little bit passionate about it all because legislation was changing. They were trying to change the legislation. So MP Tony Burke from the Labor Party of Australia and the Transport Workers Union, people like Michael Caine and so on and so forth, they were all like, okay, we're changing legislation. We're making employee-like a thing going through. Now I was off the closing the loopholes bill. And it's been about 6 months. And I sat back and I was like, let's see what happens with this. Let's see what they do. Let's see the changes that occur. Because at the time, they did this big change across on legislation in Australia saying, cool, we're opening up, and this is the high level, guys. So the closing loopholes bill was a whole bunch of legal legislation, not just touching gig workers directly, but a whole bunch of different things. And they got prioritized through. They did a small release, then a bigger release, and then they pushed all the legislation in under the Labor Party. And it was like, okay, cool. So they've set it up that any worker or union or legislator or anyone interested in political parties can go straight to Fair Work on behalf of gig workers and make changes that spread across the entire industry. Interesting, right? Okay, cool. So we can see changes to stop gig companies circumventing around the laws, and it kind of holds them accountable to changes we want to see in the country. Now, that could be a good thing or an incredibly bad thing, depending on what the legislation is and the interests of the parties pushing it through Fair Work. And at the time, the Labor Party, MP Tony Burke, they were all celebrating with the Transport Workers Union, saying, huge victory for gig workers, huge victory. We've passed the bill. We've passed the legislation. We can go to Fair Work. We can make all these changes. Anyone can put these changes through, and it's going to revolutionize the gig industry in Australia. It's going to protect workers. It's going to increase their working rights. It's going to pay them better. It's going to do all this kind of stuff, which was their kind of concept. They were floating up in the cloud there, making it seem like all these amazing things are going to happen. But it's been 6 months since the legislation changed, and nothing has happened. So the union and the Labor Party turned around and used this win to politicise themselves out in the news. They said huge wins for workers' rights, but they've done nothing with it. Nothing's changed. There's nothing even lodged through a Fair Work. They're not pushing any changes. They are sitting back and resting on their laurels for a win because it's great political points for them. So I'm going to run through how we got bamboozled and the big scam and the wall that covered our eyes from the Transport Workers Union. My first point that I want to make against the Transport Workers Union in Australia would be on the lead up to all these changes occurring. All of the news, all of these sittings with politicians where they had gig drivers coming there to talk to change the laws in the country. So they had gig drivers standing there crying poor, saying, I'm broke. We only make $3 an hour. All this kind of rubbish like that. But rubbish aside, here's where I'm going to get very aggressive against the whole concept for it. So the people standing in front of our politicians, the people trying to change the laws, the people they hand-picked to stand there and talk about it, we're not Australian citizens in some cases. If I went across to America or if I went across to China and stood in front of politicians over there to try to change the laws of their country, and I'm not a citizen in that country, I would be kicked out. They would say, no, we're not listening. You're not even a citizen. You cannot influence our policy in this country. But for some reason, they were allowed to stand there, plead their stories, and were used as use cases in this country to politicize and change policy here. Honestly, guys, is Australia a fucking country, or are we just an economic zone at this point? We have people from overseas who are not citizens dictating the policy that citizens need to live over here. That doesn't make any fucking sense. But they got away with it, and they pulled one person up after the next. I'm not going to name names, and I'm going to point them out, and we're going to show photos of the people doing it, but they were not citizens. And over time, a little bit of background politics occurred, and some of these people that stood up there was crying poor, saying Australians don't get paid enough doing delivery driving. They were immigrants across to this country. Some of them now have Australian citizenships because they realised that this would be a strong political attack against them if the opponents or opposers figured out that they have people who are not Australian citizens trying to dictate legislation in Australia. So I'll let you chew on that. I don't think that's right, and I think any other country would not even consider it for a second, but for some reason here in Australia, we did. Second point, after 6 months of the legislation passing, there is nothing going through Fair Work from the Transport Workers Union or from MP Tony Burke to try change things across the country for gig workers. The process is they need to file through a Fair Work, and then there is a case that's created from there which is publicly visible, which at that point anyone else who wants to oppose it or Fair Work themselves will hear it through, and they'll work through each issue at a time. And there's nothing coming through the pipeworks. Nothing's lodged yet after 6 months. So they're just resting on a political win in the news saying, yeah, we changed it and we fixed it all for the gig workers. But no, they didn't. They didn't do anything. So at this point, it's a sham and it's a shame. We had MP Tony Burke. He was supposed to be representing the Australian people, trying to make changes for it all. To put this stuff through, and he passed legislation. He hasn't done anything further with it. And you had Michael Caine from the Transport Workers Union, and he's saying, yeah, we won big here, we're going to change everything and make it all good. And they've done nothing. Why have they done nothing? Well, it's because there's not enough gig workers signed up to the union. There's no real interest or push at this point for them to do anything. And guys, let's pull back the curtains just a little bit, and we're going to have a look at some motivations here. So the more unhappy gig workers get in Australia, the more likely they are to join up to the union and pay a union membership, even though the union's not doing anything, but the more likely they are. And secondly, the reason why the union's not going in hard and fierce saying, hey, gig companies in Australia, let's lock down employing more people through or letting more people sign up to the apps to become employee-like. Instead of stopping that and just allowing the gig apps to keep recruiting more and more and more and more people, signing them all up as willy-nilly as it may be, until you have everyone in Australia is a gig driver. The reason why the union doesn't stop this is because the more people signed up to these gig apps means the more conversion they could get in the future to paid members. So the union is incentivized to allow more and more people to keep signing up, to allow the gig workers to get saturated, because it means potentially more members for them down the track. So the union is incentivized right now to do nothing because they want workers to get unhappy, to get frustrated, to get angry about it all. Meanwhile, they want more and more and more workers to keep signing up to these gig platforms, so there's more potential union members in the future who get unhappy and disgruntled and want to see change, even though the opportunity for change is available right now, but they're choosing deliberately not to do it. So guys, that's a rant. That is a failure of the political system in Australia. We made changes through, we got it all pushed through. The unions wanted this change in. The unions pushed MP Tony Burke to make these changes, the closing the loopholes bill, and they got the politicians to put it into legislation. The union, Tony Burke went through the unions in his early political career and got pushed up by his union mates into the current position that he is in currently. And yeah, he got his favours, but they called their favours back in and said, we want this. And now that they got it, nothing's happening. So it was a political play the entire time. They got their news headlines, they got their fame, their glory, but they done nothing. And there's no change at all. So my challenge is to the Transport Workers Union, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you doing? What the fuck was this all for? Okay? If you're going to make a change, make a change. But if you're going to make a change, make it transparent to the drivers for us to vote on it, for us to see it before you make any changes. And don't allow people who aren't even Australian citizens to dictate through these changes in the future, because you just dropped the ball there. That was bullshit, guys. Absolutely crap. So, what are you going to do to fix it? And guys, understandably, a little bit heated on that one. I sat back for 6 months. I wanted to see what happened. I was hoping there'd be some good changes come through, but there was nothing. It was all political bullshit. So, leave your thoughts down below. Do you think the union's going to save us? Because they've had 6 months to. What would you like to see the union do? What should the gig companies do to beat the unions to any changes? Leave it down below in the comments, but holy crap, guys, like, what a shit show. Welcome to Australia, right?